All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another episode of the Facts Over Feelings podcast. I'm once again joined here by my two co-hosts, two somewhat delusional Suns fans in Jack Eden and Trevor Kaufman. And we got a decent slate today for the podcast. We took an extra week off trying to wait and see how free agency in the NBA, the trade situations would pan out. And to be honest, we didn't get that much clarity. We got some information, we got some deals done, but not as much as I think, would have hoped for. Really, the elephant in the room is this Kevin Durant situation, Kyrie Irving situation. And I really wanted to hand this off to Eden first because, he's been really in on the situation, being a Suns fan, being a fan of some questionable journalists and Flex from Jersey. And I just wanted to hand it off to Eden and see, what do you think's the status on Kevin Durant? Is he going to go to Phoenix? Can Phoenix trade for him? Where's Kyrie going? When's this all going to happen?
I have a legitimate theory from the sources that have been talking to me. That part's a joke. But anyways, I do have a theory on why this is taking so long and what could speed this up. And I think here's my theory, just to explain it to you. So everyone on the media right now is saying Brooklyn wants to trade Kevin Durant and work on that deal and get as much as they can before they go to a Kyrie Irving deal. And I ultimately think that the opposite is going to happen. I think the Kyrie Irving trade will happen first, and here's why. There's a clear suitor in the LA Lakers that need him. You saw last year they were unable to make it even to the playoffs with Russell Westbrook pairing with LeBron and AD. So there's clear emphasis on LeBron's part, who has only 1 year left in his contract and has refused to re-sign at this point, ultimately because he knows this team isn't going to win how it's currently constructed. And he believes Kyrie Irving is his best option to do so. But here's the issue is the Lakers know that the Nets are the only team that are going for Kyrie Irving. The Lakers are. And the Nets know that if once they trade Kyrie Irving, then they have to move Kevin Durant. So they're both kind of stuck in this limbo of who's going to be the first to blink. As of now, I've seen offers that LA is willing to put one unprotected first-round pick in 2027 in for a deal for Kyrie, but they've been reluctant to put a second 2029 unprotected first-round pick, which at that point LeBron would be gone. Who knows if Kyrie's even there? He's only got 1 year on his deal as well. And at that point, they already have all of their picks gone at this point, so they kind of need that stuff down the line to replace those guys. But the Nets are holding on and saying, we have leverage as long as KD and Kyrie are both still on the roster. There's a chance that they could come back and play together. I don't know how likely that is, but there's at least that thought that they could versus if they trade one of them or the other, that will not happen. So we're kind of at this standing point right now. The Lakers are willing to give up almost everything else except for that second first-round pick that the Nets are asking for. And I ultimately believe once the Lakers offer that 2029 first-round pick unprotected in addition to the 2027 one, the Nets will move Kyrie Irving. They know that they will not be able to get a better offer from the Lakers, and no one else wants him. And then at that point, you're stuck with KD alone on your roster, who will not play for you. You have to move him. And at that point, maybe that's when the asking price comes down, when the leverage is no longer there. But that's kind of what I'm waiting on right now is I'm watching this Brooklyn Nets, Los Angeles Lakers situation unfold. And it ultimately comes down to whether the Lakers include that 2029 unprotected first in any offer for Kyrie Irving.
Trevor, do you have any thoughts on this whole situation, or you want me to go ahead?
You can go.
Look, I don't necessarily buy Eden's theory. It's not a bad thought process. My only thing, and I told this to Eden off the air, I was just like, I was skeptical that the Nets would put themselves into that situation because we all know when Kyrie Irving gets traded, Kevin Durant, has absolutely zero attachment to the Nets. And right now, look, they're not going to stay, but there's like that small doubt, that small possibility that they stay because they're both currently there. That might be, keeping that asking price a little higher than it otherwise would be, right? So for me, if they trade Kyrie first, they're knowingly putting themselves in a worse position. And I just don't see them doing that. Like, I still think this is taking a lot longer than I thought it would. I really didn't think that they would want this to drag on for this long. I didn't think that teams would be as hesitant. In my opinion, we'll talk about this later down in the pod. The Gobert trade messed a lot of this up. I think it put a really, really bad bar or a benchmark for a lot of these stars to be traded. You know, because we all know Rudy Gobert is a really good player at what he does, but he's a very limited player. He's a very limited player is what he is, right? So he's really good at what he does, but he's limited. And to get the haul that they did for him was like really weird. It was really weird. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But my point is that puts a really, really like unreachable pedestal for what the Nets will want for a guy like Kevin Durant. And even like a Donovan Mitchell. I don't know how I don't know how teams going to actually trade for a guy like Kevin Durant with the asking price that they want, assuming that they want a lot more than what they got for Gobert or the Jazz got for Gobert. And they got a really, really big haul. So I think that's kind of what slowed everything down. I think also the teams that Kevin Durant wants to go to aren't necessarily in the best position to trade for him. So like talking about Phoenix for a second, after we'll talk about DeAndre Ayton, staying in Phoenix in just a second here. But the fact that he did, the fact that Phoenix matched, he can't be traded in any trade for a whole year, unless, and especially not till at least January. And so now what's the centerpiece for the Suns? What's the centerpiece? Mikal Bridges isn't good enough to be a centerpiece in a Kevin Durant trade. I'm sorry. He's just not. Now, if the asking price goes down a ton, maybe he is, but not as it stands right now. I just don't see it. And so I think that's just put a super, it's just slowed the process down a ton because he wants to go to Phoenix. Kevin Durant does. We all know it. But the Phoenix just don't have the assets that Brooklyn wants. And so it's just a really, really bad spot. And I'm torn on if Kevin Durant does go to Phoenix because he really wants to go there. But it's like, I just don't see, unless the asking price gets lowered an insane amount. And if it does, other teams can then get involved at that price. Like, I just don't see how the Suns can trade enough for Kevin Durant. It's just hard to me. So
Ryan, I have a question for you.
What? Go ahead.
Do you think DeAndre Ayton has more value before he signed his contract? Do you think DeAndre Ayton had more value than Mikal Bridges in a trade?
I mean, definitely, assuming that he signs a new contract with that team that he goes to. Yeah, for sure. Look, DeAndre Ayton has all-star potential. He'll probably make some all-star teams in his career. Mikal, look, like he's a great defensive player, but like Ayton is just like much, much better on the offensive end and much more valuable on that end. And I think that it's reflected in the contract. Right? Ayton got a max deal. Did Mikal? No. I mean, it wasn't even really that close.
That might be another reason why teams would value Mikal more, and especially in a league that you've said that is run more by wings than by centers. I was kind of surprised that you said that.
But the thing is, go ahead. I'm sorry.
My thought process, and I think teams around the league agree, considering that it took Ayton almost a month to sign, is that the center position isn't as highly valued as the wing position. And I think ultimately, if you put in a trade offer Mikal Bridges or DeAndre Ayton there, I believe that the majority of teams would probably choose Mikal Bridges over DeAndre Ayton. This Kevin Durant isn't on the majority of teams. He's on the Brooklyn Nets. So what would the Brooklyn Nets want more? And there had been reports that the Nets did not want Ayton. So I think Mikal Bridges is highly coveted around the league as he's a 15-point per game scorer. He was the runner-up for the Defensive Player of the Year this year, and that's as a third option or a fourth option on a team. If he becomes, a second option on a team, could he get to be a 20-point per game scorer? I think that's a realistic possibility with an expanded role.
I mean, if you're on like Detroit, sure, or like a horrible team, yeah. Like let's not pretend.
If he went to Brooklyn without KD and Kyrie, I think he could score 20 a game.
Oh, probably, but he's not a 2 on a legitimate title contending team or a legitimate playoff contending team. He's not a 2. I don't think, and that's no like.
I think he could be a 3, but I don't see him at this point being.
But right, so like I think that like if you're trading Kevin Durant, I think that the Nets want someone who can at least be a 2 on a legitimate playoff contending team. They don't want to go back to like absolute obscurity, right? They want to still be at least pretty relevant. At least that's what we're getting told, right? So if you're operating from that mindset, you're not going to trade for a guy like Mikal as the centerpiece just because he's not going to be the centerpiece of your new team. He's just not, right? Like he will be that number one building the role guy, He'll be the number one guy to support that main cast, but he won't be that guy. Right?
So then at this point, I know it's early to say, but who do you think would be a better option on these other teams that you're saying? And considering that I know you love Scotty Barnes, but he's not been involved in any trade packages right now.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, who is someone who could realistically be involved in a trade?
Yeah. So you bring up Scotty. Realistically, he won't be involved in a trade, but like that's a guy, that's a centerpiece.
Right.
A 21-year-old rookie of the year is a centerpiece, right?
That's going to offer.
I mean, yeah, I just said that. I'm just saying, like, so, like, I'm just saying that's what the Nets want. The Nets want a legitimate, like, even like a guy like Siakam, an older. I mean, look,
they're not going to get it. They're just not.
I mean, they probably won't get Scotty, but you could easily get, someone a little bit older who's almost as talented. You could probably pull someone like that. I wouldn't think it's that insane for Toronto to trade. I wouldn't think it's that crazy for Toronto to trade Siakam. I don't know why it would be. He's 27. 26, 27. He's not even their future necessarily. They have a ton of other wings. I mean, that's a legitimate option to me, right? I mean, that's something that's definitely possible. I mean, if the Celtics were interested in blowing it up with Jaylen Brown, you bring
clearly not.
That's a perfect option right there.
They're just clearly not interested in blowing it up, but sure.
Okay, I mean, like I'm
being a little bit of a jerk to Ryan.
I'm just telling you they're not going to take Mikal Bridges as the main centerpiece. Like it's silly to pretend that they will.
They're not going to get anybody because
then Kevin Durant's under contract for 4 years and he'll just sit there. Like sure, yeah, okay.
But that's a Ben Simmons situation, and that's exactly what happened to Philadelphia. Not exactly what happened, but it's going to be a Ben Simmons 2.0. They're going to have a guy sit there, not play. And eventually down the line, they're going to have to accept a trade offer for probably a much worse price than.
Did they? They got James Harden.
Yeah, washed up James Harden.
For Ben Simmons, who hasn't played a game. That's not a worse trade. That's a fantastic trade.
Ben Simmons is also.
That's what I was saying at the beginning of when they traded.
So time could actually be in their favor if a team decided to pull the trigger and get impatient, right? So the Nets got impatient with James Harden. They clearly didn't. Something was going on with Kyrie, KD, and Harden. They wanted him to get out.
They got Seth Curry and Ben Simmons in return. It's not like they traded away James Harden for picks, right? Like they got two very capable NBA players. And if Ben Simmons ever decides to play,
and they got a player who won't play. Yeah. So like my point is like, yeah, he's very talented when he plays, but he doesn't play. This is a whole other argument. My point is when you trade a guy who sits out for a while for James Harden, like I'm sorry, like that's worth it. Like that's worth it.
Here's what I'll say with that is if Kevin Durant gets traded to a team like Toronto or a team that maybe has a better centerpiece than Mikal Bridges, is he going to play then? You bring up this point, Ben Simmons didn't play.
Yes.
So is Kevin Durant, and that's what we don't know at this point. What we know is he is willing to play for the Phoenix Suns, and he's probably willing to play for the Miami Heat. And that's at this point.
But we also don't know that he said no to anywhere.
Those are the team, right? But
so
we also only know that,
and that's what's holding teams back from trading a Scotty Barnes in a deal is because they're not sure Kevin Durant would commit to them for that.
Well, I don't know if that's why. I think they don't want to trade Scotty Barnes because he's 13 years younger than KD, and they realize that like the guy was already like, you know what I mean? Like it's just like you don't want to mortgage your entire future. Like the Pelicans won't trade Zion, not that they can anymore, but they wouldn't trade him
or
because
Brandon
of his
Ingram.
age. They probably.
I think both of those are a factor. I think age and if he's willing to stay, I think both of those are factors.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, it's.
But to go back to Trevor's point, I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that whatever team Kevin Durant gets traded to, he needs to play for them. So if there's only X number of teams that are only willing to give up their third best option, their fourth best option for Kevin Durant, I think ultimately the Nets asking price will come down and they'll accept that with picks. Now, do I know when that's going to be? No. It could go into the season, but I honestly think that if it gets to training camp and Kevin Durant is still on the Nets roster, I think that's a bad look. I think because, you're going into camp with your team, you're all figuring out starting to gel. So I think they really have until training camp to get the maximum value for Kevin Durant. And once training camp hits, I think that value will drop even more than it is right now.
But to be fair, we said the same thing about, I'm sure about Simmons, right? Like, they need to get this guy out of that locker room. It's just toxic. It's a tough environment. It's not working. Right.
Daryl Morey held on and took advantage of a bad situation in Brooklyn with Harden. So is there a bad situation that comes around? No one's going to know. And that's the risk that the Nets take is you could tank his value or wait for a bad situation where it evens out. But I don't know. That's a gamble to take. And also, I think there's a clear difference between the caliber of player of Ben Simmons and the caliber of player of Kevin Durant. And I feel like at some point the NBA may end up putting pressure on the Nets to be like, we need this guy to play. It's tanking ratings. And does it have an impact? I don't know, but I think that could happen down the line.
We can move on from this in a second. I'm sorry, Trevor, you haven't had a chance to get a lot of words in. I just want to say one last thing. The NBA and Adam Silver aren't happy with the power that these players have been having and the publicity with which they're getting traded. Adam Silver made he's not happy with what Kevin Durant did. And I think, and Trevor, I mean, we can talk about this for a second. I think he has a point. The players to publicly ask for a trade with 4 years left on your deal it's a problem. And at what point do you start to like sit there and be like, man, how can these teams build a legitimate franchise when you have players on 3 or 4 year contracts forcing you to trade them? And it puts too much pressure on these teams. They can't really build for the future. And the power is a little too much in the hands of the players right now. Trevor, I mean, you made a comment. I don't know if you want to say something on this, but I mean, that's kind of my thought. It's a little bit of a problem.
I agree with you, Ryan. And I agree with a lot of what Ryan said. To take it all the way back to the beginning of the podcast, I disagree with Eden's theory that this whole thing's being held up by a 2029 first round pick, because I agree with Ryan's point. It makes no sense from the Nets perspective to trade away Kyrie Irving before Kevin Durant, because you get rid of any leverage or positioning you have, right? Like once you trade away Kyrie, it's over. And Kevin Durant's trade value in turn probably goes down as well. So for me, I don't think it's an interesting theory. I just disagree. I don't think it's going to play out like that. And then to where I disagree with Ryan a little bit, I just don't agree. Like, I agree with Ryan that the Nets should be asking for a Scotty Barnes or a very young all-star-like player. But here's the problem. It takes two to tango. And these teams aren't putting up an Anthony Edwards, a Scotty Barnes, an Evan Mobley, for example, right? Like they're not putting up the caliber of player that the Brooklyn Nets want. So what's the next tier of player down? It's a guy like a Mikal Bridges, an all-NBA defender, a really, really good, solid offensive player with a good three-point shot, a good mid-range jump shot, right? Like it's a guy who can give you 15, 18 a night in a little bit of an expanded role. So for me, if I'm Brooklyn, you were on the other side of this 10 years ago when you traded for Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and was it Rajon Rondo as well? I don't even know. I know you traded for. Yeah. And what did Boston do? Boston didn't get a young superstar in return. They got a bunch of draft picks and they rebuilt their team through the draft. And that's what the Brooklyn Nets should do here. Take advantage of this opportunity to get some young, high caliber, really good NBA starters and get 5 or 6 draft picks and find your Jason Tatums, your Jaylen Browns, and, your Scotty Barneses in the draft because they're out there. Tank for Victor Wembanyama. That's a 1-year rebuild. That guy's going to be a stud in the NBA.
Yes, he will.
So for me, you're seeing, right? Like they offered for Brandon Ingram. It seems like the Pelicans didn't accept that offer for Kevin Durant for Brandon Ingram.
Are we sure that they actually offered that?
The Nets offer that, if I'm not mistaken, right, Eden?
Yes.
The Nets offered Brandon Ingram, Nance, and multiple firsts to the Pelicans, which
it's a report on Instagram, supposedly.
Okay,
right.
But it's realistic. Like that's what they would want for Kevin.
That's what the Nets would want.
Bro, if I'm the Nets, I'd be okay with Ingram straight up. The age difference is enough for me. Anyway. Well,
point being, I just don't think these other teams are going to match the Nets asking price. Which is why I think they should have traded Kevin Durant immediately while his value was at an all-time high. Now he might not play for certain teams. Teams are very reluctant to get in on the action because of the asking price. So I think his value is just going to slowly decrease. And I think eventually the Nets are going to have to, be pressured into trading him because I don't think he's going to play, especially if they're talking about dealing Kyrie. I just don't see Kevin Durant playing for the Brooklyn Nets again. He might not come to Phoenix, but I don't see him, playing another game in the Brooklyn uniform. I just think,
I agree.
If a guy publicly and goes to the owner and requests a trade out of your franchise, like that's not a guy that's going to show up for training camp.
Do you not, you don't like that though, right? That he can go and publicly request a trade with 4 years left on a deal. Like, what do you think?
That's a separate issue, but yes, I don't like that at all. I think that's very slimy, especially for a guy like Kevin Durant, who, you know, they brought in players for him. They brought in Kyrie for him. They brought in Harden for him. They, you know, Steve Nash is the coach because of him, right? Like the Nets, you know, the Nets did kind of like what the Cavs and the Lakers did with LeBron, right? Like they formatted the team for Kevin Durant, for LeBron. And now Kevin Durant with 4 years left on a deal says, oh, I don't really like it. I'm going to go play for Phoenix, who's a 64-win team and was the number 1 seed in the West, right? Like that's the argument for, you know, like the slight tarnish in KD's legacy, which is another issue, is just kind of jumping around to where a good situation already exists. But back to the issue at hand, Kevin Durant, I should say the Nets have overplayed their hand, in my opinion. I think you trade for a tier down of player that, you know, that you ideally want this, but you can get this. But if you want this, you're not going to get 5 picks with this. So for me, get 5 picks, get 2 or 3 really good NBA players who in an expanded role could turn into an all-star, could turn into a really, really good player, and rebuild. And I just don't think the Nets want to rebuild, and I'm not sure why, but that's my 2 cents on it.
Here's what I'll say as far as the tanking point is, there's no reason for the Brooklyn Nets to tank because the Houston Rockets own all of their picks going forward from the James Harden trade. So I think that's another reason why the level of player that they want is so much higher, is because until 2028 or whatever, they own none of their picks and they all go to Houston. So that James Harden trade looks better by the day, by the hour for Houston. But yeah, and I mean,
but you got to get some picks in return. Durant. I mean, you're going to get picks, right? Like if you're going to get picks, they might not be Houston Rockets picks, but you're going to get picks.
Right.
But like right now, you're sitting with nothing.
Right. And
right now, you're sitting with no KD and no future. So like, at least take the future.
That's why I think they're holding out for such a high quality player right now, because they know they have to win now and there's no incentive to losing. But ultimately, they're going to realize that they can't get that, and then their asking price will eventually come down. But I just wanted to make that point with the picks as well.
I mean, okay, look, you think the price will eventually inevitably come down?
I think, yeah.
Because like I said, like I mean,
after training camp, it'll eventually start to come down. Or if they move Kyrie first, it'll definitely
come down if that happens.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I can't see that happening. I will say if KD gets moved, Kyrie will be moved within like the week. I mean, it's just like it'll happen, right?
Here's my thing is, now if you don't move either of them, and let's say neither of them want to play, but you still have both on your roster, and you go into the season, neither of them are playing, you don't have your picks anyways. It'd be better to bring in a Mikal Bridges or someone like that.
But they don't have to rush it. The draft is until June of the next year. Good Lord. The draft is until June of next year, right?
If you suck and you hold on to them until the trade deadline, and you're at the bottom of the East, and then you make this trade, you still suck. Your pick goes to Houston anyways. So I think teams realize that, like, you could say you're holding on to them, and there's that little bit of hope that they could play together still.
Right.
But if they ultimately decide we're not playing until we get a trade, then Brooklyn needs to move them, because there's no point to keeping them.
Right.
And that's why I think I wouldn't be surprised if Kyrie Irving gets moved first. And I also think if you're looking at what you could get picks-wise for these guys looking into the future, that 2027 and 29 unprotected Lakers pick could turn out to be really damn good. And I don't know if the Suns picks would be the same, at least they wouldn't be great until the 4 years after Kevin Durant's contract are done, and then no CP.
How do you know KD's going to play
KD,
for 4
and
years?
then who knows what it becomes. But the Lakers, if they lose LeBron, if they don't have Kyrie Irving, like, you're telling me you're running with Anthony Davis and you have no picks in the future to get any better? I think those 2 picks are going to be very valuable, and that's why they're holding out for Kyrie.
I just personally think they're waiting until they trade KD. Like, I just think it's like a 1-2. We'll see that.
I think if they could, that would be their goal, but I don't know if they can do that at this point. And the question
they still have time. They still have a couple months here.
But as soon as you get offered that second unprotected first from the Lakers, I think they take it.
Oh, of course. I think they do too.
And if they trade Kyrie, they will not get offered that second unprotected pick.
But I just think that you have an understanding with the Lakers. Like, look, we'll accept this as soon as Kevin's traded. Like it's one of those understandings. Like, look, Kyrie will be on your team. Just let us find a deal for KD before we make this official. That's my thought process of that. You very well could be right. I mean, that's just what I think will happen.
Yeah.
I really think they're just hoping that a
point
team
on
breaks
this,
for a second and decides to give them a player that they really want. Like I really just think they're just in the holding pattern here, hoping that someone offers them a player that they really like. And we'll see if that happens.
Which the problem is their time clock is ticking. So teams know that. Ultimately, if they're not getting that offer now, I don't believe they're going to get
I think that Golden State's a very interesting trade partner that we can talk about on next week's podcast. I think it's very.
Let's save it for next week.
Yeah.
It's an interesting option, but I cannot see him going back to the team that he left to go win with, and then they won. I just can't see that. That would be more cowardice than his first move there.
Agreed.
He's a runner. He's a track star, Trevor.
That's true.
But one more point I want to make on this is I was talking with Ryan about this before the pod is there's an important date coming up on August 4th. And I believe Ryan and I figured out that that's the first day that the Lakers can offer LeBron James an extension.
Yep.
And everything that's going around right now is that LeBron will not sign an extension if they sit on Westbrook and they don't trade for Kyrie Irving.
Even if they trade for
another
Kyrie.
Point in time where the Lakers may be pushed a little bit and maybe they say, hey, now I'll throw the second pick in. Then you move Kyrie, and then from there, everything happens.
I fully expect, by the way, Kyrie and LeBron only play in LA for 1 year. They're both on 1-year contracts. They'll both be free agents next year, and they might go their separate ways. My guess is they play there for 1 year, reevaluate as free agents, see what happens. I'd be shocked. I would be shocked. I'd be surprised if any of them sign an extension before next summer. Like, I think if they're both in LA, they both just become free agents and reevaluate. I think that they're going to try it for a year.
But as far as LeBron goes, if you don't even make the effort to go get Kyrie, he'll be thinking they don't have our best interest to win in mind, and that will push him out the door even more.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a
so it's August 4th. Watch around that date. I think that's when these next 2 weeks, nothing really is going to happen. But things may start to pick up around August 4th.
We'll see. But look, like it's been pretty slow on this, and I hope something happens, but nothing's happened yet. And yeah, I think that about sums it up. We've talked through this a bunch. We'll talk more about it as things happen, things come out. But I think we can move on to talk about another topic that's sort of related to this in DeAndre Ayton. And him signing a max extension with the Phoenix Suns for 4 years, $133, I believe, $1 million. After getting that max offer sheet from the Indiana Pacers, the Suns matched, and that was that. I just want to say I was surprised they matched as quickly as they did. I'm going to stand by my statement that I don't think he should be a max player. I think that the Suns need him, especially if they don't get KD, they need him to be in true finals contention right now. Paul's just not what he was. He just can't be a fully reliable 2 at this point. And so I don't like maxing Ayton. It might not be worth the full value, but it's like a necessary evil for the Suns right now. And I understand why they did it. Like, it might hurt them in years 3 and 4 without Chris Paul. I think without Chris Paul, Ayton, I just don't think he's going to be as good as he is. But like I said, it's a necessary evil. You have to do it if you're trying to stay in legitimate contention. So I understand why they did it, and they did it really quickly. I thought they would look for a sign and trade. I guess they just didn't like what they got offered, and that was that. So kudos to them. They kept them. And worst case scenario, they run it back with the same team minus JaVale McGee. So basically the same 2021 roster. So, what are your guys' thoughts on that? Are you okay with this? Are there any qualms with anything in this whole process? Are you kind of like, you're happy about how it went down?
I want Trevor to go first. I
don't know how I feel about it. I was hoping we could move him. Honestly, maybe we were just completely wrong, but to me, it just seemed like Ayton was done in Phoenix and Phoenix was done with Ayton. I've always had this battle with whether we should max him or not, because I see all the reasons to max him. I think he's a top 3-5 center in the NBA in terms of skill level. But his effort on the court isn't always there. So for me, it's tough. But look, with how everything played out, the Suns made the right call. You have to keep him. You can't let him walk for nothing. That was what Ian and I had always said. Like, we're not going to let him walk for nothing, right? We're going to try and move him somewhere. You know, we tried moving him for Kevin Durant. Obviously that didn't work. But if push came to shove, we were going to re-sign DeAndre Ayton. And here's the thing, it's a max, but it's the cheapest we would have, it's the cheapest amount of money we could get for him. Basically, we would have, if we wanted to extend him ourselves on a 4-year, I think we would have had to extend him 4 years, 140 million or something like that. So, I mean, we saved like $7 or $8 million by getting him for a little bit of a cheaper price because Indiana sent over the offer sheet. So for me, look, like, the Suns are running it back. A couple new faces on the bench. That's about it. I'm not mad about it. I mean, I don't know if we're good enough to win the West with this team. We did it 2 years ago. And then last year I expected us to do it again. But for whatever reason, a lot of our other players, our role players, played worse than they did in the prior postseason.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we can find that form that we had in the regular season and find that form that we had in the 2021 playoffs, I think this roster is definitely good enough with a DeAndre Ayton to, be contenders. And I think if DeAndre Ayton plays like he did in 2021 in the playoffs, where he went toe to toe with Anthony Davis and he slowed down Nikola Jokic, and, he was asked to guard Giannis, and obviously Giannis, cooked him, but he had a great postseason. He had a great postseason. So for me, I think he's worth what he got paid. I think he's worth every penny of 100. I think he's worth every penny of $133 million.
Okay.
Well, he has gotten better every year he's been in the NBA. He was an incredibly valuable asset for us in these last 2 playoff runs, especially in 2021. We are a much worse team without him. Yes, would I have liked to move him? I think we should have moved him. But at the end of the day, the Suns were like the Nets. If we're not going to get, the player that we want for DeAndre Ayton, we're just going to keep him, right? And it seems like DeAndre Ayton's happy to be back. I'm not seeing anything negative from him on social media.
Has he said anything?
He's been very quiet. I've seen a couple gym pics of him recently working out, but that's about it, which is good to see. So for me, the Suns are going to be right there again this year, right? Like, we're not going anywhere. And look, Chris Paul's old, but Chris Paul can play. Devin Booker will be great this year. I think Ayton's going to be a 20-10, 20-12 guy this year. So, this team can get to the finals. It's just a matter of, can we kind of put it all together at the right time? So we'll see how it plays out. But overall, we made the right choice. We kind of, the decision was kind of made for us, right? Like, we couldn't get what we wanted for Ayton, so we just had to re-sign him. And I'm totally okay with it.
I think I've been saying this over the past year, and I just want to come out and say it again, that I think it wasn't the prettiest way that this was done, but it was the most productive business way to bring DeAndre Ayton back. And as far as, last offseason, us not offering him, we knew that Ayton was going to get a max contract. And the biggest difference for us is we didn't want to offer him a 5-year max. We wanted to offer him a 4-year max, which is something that we know DeAndre Ayton and his camp would not have accepted from the Phoenix Suns. So we basically said, go out and find it on your own. Whatever you find, we will match. And I think that's the business play when you have a restricted free agent, is you have all the leverage because whatever they get, you can just decide to say, yeah, we'll pay you that and you have to come back to us. So I think that James Jones really played the restricted free agency card very well. The max he could have gotten from Phoenix was 5 years, 176, I think, 180-ish. 4 years, 140. Instead, we bring him back for 4 years, 133. So we're still paying him max money, and I think he deserves it. You can see all the talent is there and all the capability of getting there is there. Now he just has to kind of put it together. But I think from the business side of making this decision, the media kind of took and ran with it that, there's separation between the Suns and Ayton, and neither side is happy with the other. And I think ultimately James Jones deciding to match in about 3 minutes is what made all that stuff go away. It's not that we don't value Ayton and we sat here for 48 hours trying to decide whether or not to pay him. We matched it in 3 minutes.
Like 3 minutes.
Well, to be fair,
we know how valuable he
I mean, you had weeks to figure that out before you got offered the offer sheet. So it's not, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, you were probably, if you were deliberating, it was before the offer sheet was given out, right? Like, it's not like you had no discussions prior to the offer sheet.
Right.
Like,
But these things
I mean, it's
typically,
irrelevant that
they
it
were
took 3
gonna-
minutes.
They were
these
going to
teams
resign
typically
him.
take the 48 hours to decide or close to it. It's never been a 3-minute, oh yeah, we'll match. It's more of like, think about it for a day, match him, think about it for 2 days, match him.
I mean,
And also the other point I want to make here is if bringing DeAndre Ayton back truly affected the Suns' chances at getting Kevin Durant, they would not have brought him back within 3 minutes. And I guarantee you they would have exhausted all options within the 48 hours to try and bring Kevin Durant in if it meant losing DeAndre Ayton. And the fact that they did it in 3 minutes to bring him back helps them realize they know that DeAndre Ayton does not affect their chances at Kevin.
Well, I don't think that's the case at all. I think that
I agree. I don't agree with that.
I don't think if you could have one of Kevin Durant or DeAndre Ayton, they would have waited the 48 hours to try and get.
It's irrelevant to wait the 48 hours because you weren't like he was already offered the offer sheet. Sign and trade expired that midnight. Like there was nothing you could do. Right. So at that point, the only options you would have are to match or not match. So like it was pretty right. It's irrelevant to the KD situation.
So if Sarver sits here and says, I'm only paying Kevin Durant or DeAndre Ayton, that's something where this would be a case. Like the fact that Sarver is saying, not that he openly said I'm willing to pay both of them, but I get the sense that he is from the fact that the Suns brought Ayton back so quickly.
Sure.
Like, if that was a factor in the decision,
but it's irrelevant to actually acquiring KD.
Decision meant KD or no KD, and they would have taken more time to figure it out.
But also, like, there's a lot more risk in that because you lose Ayton for nothing, and sure, I just think it's irrelevant.
I'm not saying that they would lose him. I'm just saying they would take the 48 hours to decide versus 3 minutes.
Well, but then, like, what are you deciding? Like, either way, like
you're deciding whether or not to pay
either
Ayton
way,
and
the
KD.
offer sheet that was given threw out any chance of Ayton being involved in anything related to KD. So it's like I just like it already hurts your chances of getting KD. Like it's done as soon as the offer sheet was offered. Like it hurt your chances. Like I know they didn't want DA. But like the idea was that you trade DA for someone that they would want, right? Or like right. So like that idea is just gone, right? So at that point, you're just like, we need to like at least save something and get DA. Because if you let DA walk, you also not only don't have DA, but then what do you have to trade for KD? We're in the same situation now. So you're just
my point is, why don't you take that 48 hours then to figure that out? To exhaust.
But like you don't have any option.
But
what are you figuring out?
Option.
You have no option. Your option is sign him or don't. Like it's irrelevant. Like you don't have anything to think about. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, I'm talking about this from a money perspective. So
I mean, I suppose, but I'm sure that.
But the Suns are willing to pay, right? Like it seems like the Suns are willing to go.
Which we found out by bringing Ayton in 3 minutes. That's my point.
My only thing is like I'm sure they've talked about it with Sarver before.
Leads to not getting Kevin Durant.
Like as soon as it was made public that KD wanted to be out, I'm sure it was like, hey, Sarver, like, will you be willing to pay both these guys? The answer is yes or no. Like, I'm sure they already had the answer.
Seems to be yes.
Yeah, like that's I just, I think they already had the answer. But I mean,
I think the DeAndre Ayton situation is irrelevant to the Kevin Durant situation at this point. I just think, right, like the Nets didn't want DeAndre Ayton, so that kind of like eliminated that trade package scenario.
Yeah,
but certainly, I agree. I certainly think the Suns are willing to pay both and are willing to go very deep into the luxury tax, which is kind of the opposite of what Robert Sarver usually does. He's usually the guy to kind of cheap out. Him and the Bengals owner they're very good friends. They don't like to pay very much.
Like Burrow's not going to stay in Cincy, but that's another story.
I don't know where that came from, but anyways,
they won't pay him.
I don't know where that came from, but
they won't pay him.
It's Ryan's mental Rolodex, and just
dude took him to the Super Bowl in his second year. They're gonna pay him, but anyways,
even have an indoor practice facility.
So like the minute the Nets didn't want DeAndre Ayton, it kind of felt like two different situations to me. Like it didn't seem like the Suns were like when they matched Ayton's offer. It didn't like I don't think Kevin Durant was in their thought process. I think they kind of had already decided. We're going to re-sign Ayton, and we're still going to go after Kevin Durant, if that makes sense.
That's what I'm saying. Is the DeAndre I think they were intent on both. Doesn't impact the Kevin Durant situation.
So
you agree with
yeah.
me?
I mean,
We were
If
like
that's your
arguing the
point,
same
then yes,
side.
I agree with you. I don't necessarily think it impacts the Kevin Durant situation all that much.
I think
Like, I don't think it was something the Suns were kind of like, I don't know if it was like a strategy of the Suns. I think the Suns were just kind of like situation A, situation B.
Yeah, like it wasn't there wasn't much to think about. Is I think Trevor N's point. There just wasn't like there was nothing to think about. Like it was like, yeah, we know what we're gonna do. Like they
had
yeah.
come to the conclusion that when they found out Kevin Durant wanted to be a Sun, they were like, we're gonna go as deep into the luxury tax as we need to get this guy.
Exactly.
I think is what the thought process is.
Okay, yeah. So we're on the same page. Okay.
And look, we'll see what happens. I'm interested to see Ayton without Paul down the road, but until that time comes,
this whole notion that Ayton can't play without Chris Paul is just mind-boggling to me.
It's not that he can't play without him. It's that like
his best game of the year was without Chris Paul.
I want to move on from this, but like centers are a lot more valuable when you have an elite pick and roll point guard giving you 3/4 of your points. Like
Booker can do that too. He's not at the same.
He can do it, but he's not a Hall of Fame, not at the Hall of Fame level.
It becomes a lot easier when DeAndre can hit shots from 16 feet and in, right? Like you don't have to you use a screen and he rolls to the mid range or to the rim and you throw him a pass. I think him being such an offensive weapon makes it easier on Chris Paul too. Personally,
look, we'll see how it goes. I mean, you're right. I agree. It makes it easier on him. But look, we'll see. I want to move on from this and do one last topic before we wrap this podcast up. I wanted to talk about a trade that I initially previewed earlier in this podcast, which was the Rudy Gobert trade. I thought it was a pretty awful trade for Minnesota. And we'll talk about this. I want to start with Trevor. Trevor, look, Minnesota gave up 4 firsts, their first-round draft pick in Walker Kessler, so basically 5 firsts, Patrick Beverley, and I think 2 other no-name nobodies, right?
Jared Vanderbilt is decent.
Yeah, I mean – for
role
Rudy
players.
For Rudy Gobert. Who won the trade? I mean, I think we know what you're going to say, but who won it?
Oh, Utah pulled some GTA highway robbery with this trade. This is one of the worst trades I've seen in recent memory. And I get it. It's Rudy Gobert, multi-time all-star defensive player.
Trevor can't even say it.
I want to get it through people's heads. This guy is not good. This guy is the most unskilled NBA player there is. He is tall and he has big arms, and that is the only reason he is valuable. What I don't understand is he can't guard outside of the paint. So all I need to do is go small, and Rudy Gobert becomes completely useless. And the guy has no offensive game. So it's not like you can use him on the other end, for a jump hook, a little jump shot, a post move. He's completely useless other than dunking the ball. So for me, to give up 5 first-round picks is just absurd. Sure. It is absurd. Minnesota just completely sold 5 years of their future for a guy that, in my opinion, is barely better than Walker Kessler. What can Rudy Gobert do that Walker Kessler can't? I'm being serious. Look, obviously he's not as good yet, but Walker Kessler's 7'1", 7'2", Ryan. I'm not sure how tall he is.
Yeah, he's 7'1". He
was an elite shot blocker in college, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
He would actually have games where he had 10 blocks. I mean, it was unreal.
Right. So he's already a Walmart Rudy Gobert with some offensive game. He can shoot threes, kind of, and he has a little bit of.
He has the shot. He has
a jump shot. So it's like I just don't get it. I don't get it. And now Minnesota? Who's coming off the bench for Minnesota next year? I genuinely want to know.
They signed Austin Rivers yesterday, Trevor.
Okay, so they're fine.
Jordan McLaughlin's there.
And here's the thing: if you're going to give up.
And they traded Malik Beasley, by the way, who was actually a good role player for them.
Did they trade him?
They did. They did.
In that deal?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
If you're gonna give up 4 first-round picks and your bench, at least get a guy that makes you a championship contender. Rudy Gobert does not make this team championship competition. This is a team that might finish top 6 in the West this year. Might.
Yeah.
And that's just because the West is really good, but still. But go ahead. That's all I have to say.
I have something to add on this Rudy Gobert point that he's not very good. And it was interesting because I was listening to this podcast and they were asking Alex.
Listen to Shaq.
Caruso.
Sorry to interrupt. Shaq talks about how Rudy Gobert gets paid $200 million and it makes him want to pound his head into the wall. And I'm just telling you, people grossly overrate this guy. But go ahead.
One of the worst contracts in the league.
He's super overpaid.
Yeah.
But anyways, in this podcast I was listening to with Alex Caruso, he was saying how he liked the move because now let me just finish here.
Go
Because
ahead.
Rudy Gobert does stuff well that Cat doesn't do well, and Cat does stuff well that Rudy Gobert doesn't. So that's why they'll fit together.
That's fair.
But which I think makes a lot of sense. But this is the point that I want to make is Alex Caruso said, when other teams go small, you have the ability to play Cat at the 5 and sit Gobert down the stretch of games. And which makes sense tactically because Gobert can't play, like Trevor was saying. But what's going through my head is you gave up your entire future for a guy who's going to sit on your bench at the end of the most important playoff games that you play. Like, that was what I immediately thought. And I thought that was astronomical. Like, I mean, you know, the role players that they gave up, Malik Beasley is pretty good. I like him. Patrick Beverly has good usage, but like he's a journeyman. And the other guy that I like is Jared Vanderbilt, can play a little bit. Outside of that, they didn't give up much, but those guys are decent role players that would fit on this team and are growing and getting better because they're so young. And you just traded that for a guy who's not even going to play in the last 5 minutes of the biggest games of your season. Like,
Yeah, imagine this team against the Clippers and the Warriors. Like
that to me
screwed.
is insane that they were willing to give up their future to pick up this guy who you're paying $40 million for to sit on your bench at the end of games.
Look,
can he figure it out?
Or
I
they
sure
play
hope
him
so, because
and
otherwise it's a terrible look.
Or they play him and let Terrence Mann go for 40 because Rudy Gobert refuses to guard the 3-point line. So like either way, it's a lose-lose. But
look,
go ahead, Ryan.
let me. I agree with most of what you said. I think you're a little bit harsh on Gobert. It was a terrible trade value-wise to give up your entire future for Rudy Gobert is stupid. It would literally be like if like a team traded for DeAndre Ayton and gave up five firsts.
Whoa.
Especially
five firsts for
especially
Ayton is
Ryan, when you
ridiculous.
already have a big in Karl
Well,
Anthony
I was
Towns.
gonna say something. I actually think the fit with the actual team is good. Like,
I agree.
The idea is correct. The idea is there. Just the haul that they gave was horrible. 2 firsts, I would have been okay with. 2 firsts, Walker Kessler, Beverly, sure. 4 firsts and is way, way, way too much. Within reason, the idea is great, in my opinion. Karl Anthony Towns is not he's not a 5. He's not a 5. He might look like a 5. He doesn't play like a 5. He's an outside player. He takes, mid-rangers. He takes 3-pointers. Karl Anthony Towns does not love brawling inside with the big guys. He doesn't like playing with the Aytons, the Jared Allens, the Clint Capellas, the Rudy Goberts inside. Gobert, that's what he does. It works perfectly if you run a tall lineup with Gobert at the 5, Cat at the 4. It's just fine. That's perfect. I think that's actually going to work really well. The problem lies in the value that you did. Like, he's way overpaid. So to be honest, it's almost like you're taking him off the Jazz's books. Like, to give five first rounders, it's just crazy. 1 or 2, that's totally okay with me. A couple bench pieces, a couple of firsts, sure. Basically 5 firsts, horrible value. The right idea. They're going to be a better team this year because of this move.
Half decent bench players who are young,
yeah,
except for Beverly.
Malik Beasley, Walker Kessler, a 20-year-old. Like, it's just like a lot of value to give up. And like I said,
but they got Austin Rivers, so it's all good.
Good Lord. I mean, like I said, though, it's going to help them in the regular season. They'll win more games. The starting lineup is really good.
It is. Putting
Cat at the 4 is the right move. He doesn't need to brawl inside. He's also not the smartest player. He makes pretty bad decisions, I think. So
who's their 3 now?
It's Jordan or Jaden McDaniels.
That's right.
They actually like him a lot. They
love him, and that's the reason they gave up so many picks is because they wanted to keep him on.
Which, like, man, maybe he'll be that good, but yeah, they just have 0 bench. So the idea is there. I like the idea, but the point is, I just don't think that they got good value at all. Awful value. And as I said earlier in the podcast, this ruins the value for other trade assets because now everyone's going to ask for the maximum level of firsts because Gobert got it, so everyone else should get it. It ruins it. So that's just tough. But
I want to build on that point quickly.
Sure.
And the guy that you have to give credit for all of this is Danny Ainge. And this isn't his first time that he's moved
And
the
he
needle.
drafts well, Brooklyn. And he drafts well.
This isn't
Go
the
ahead,
first
sorry.
time he's moved the needle in terms of major trade. Trevor talked about it earlier, shipping the old Boston
guard
core
out for the new.
For future picks, which turned into Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Like, this
Is
has
Brooklyn
had
listening?
success in the past.
They should hire me. I'll fix them. But go ahead.
This has
Oh
had
my
success in the
Lord.
past, but basically, Danny Ainge has changed the landscape of trades in the NBA more than once in the past. And he's going to do that again right here with the Rudy Gobert getting 4 picks. Now that opens up a trade for Donovan Mitchell, in which before you wouldn't have said, to move Donovan Mitchell. But now you got 4 firsts for Gobert. You can get 5 or 6 for Mitchell. And then that's going
Crazy.
now you look at Kevin Durant. What's he going to command? And it just.
Well, you can't give more than 4, right? You can only give 4 picks.
You can't give more of yours. Yeah.
But now for the Knicks with Donovan Mitchell, they traded for that Charlotte.
And that's not worth it, by the way.
They can throw those in the deal to get Donovan Mitchell for 6 first.
That's not worth it, by the way. 6 firsts for Donovan Mitchell is not worth it. That's horrible.
So that means Kevin Durant's worth 8 first-round picks.
Like, it's impossible.
My left arm and half my brain and D'Angelo
and your house. Like,
yeah.
Like,
which
just,
ultimately they're not going to get. But anyways, you have to give Danny Ainge the credit for this.
Yeah.
So I think this is part of a larger issue now. And this kind of stems from Ryan's point about this is bad for the NBA when these players are just requesting trades. The trade system in the NBA is broken. And I just think like the amount of picks that one team can get or have to give up now for some of these guys is a problem. And it might be something the NBA has to address. I just think when you're giving a team 5 first, could you imagine an NFL team with 5 years of first round picks? That would be a super team, right? Just because like you're just giving that team so much wealth for the future. I don't know. I just think the trade system is a little broken in the NBA.
Agree.
But how it's done where players can just opt out of contracts as easily as Kevin Durant can is a little broken. But like Ryan said, that's a conversation for another day, but it is a good point. So
yeah. And look, we'll wrap this up. I do want to say, I want to talk about Donovan Mitchell next week. I want to talk because we didn't get to talk about that. I want to talk about his options. Are
we ever going to talk some NFL? I want to talk
I want to talk about Deshaun Watson and his small suspension that he's going to get because some people here think he'll get a full year, which he won't. I want to talk about that. I'm excited. But look, we'll talk about some NFL.
One thought to end. Can you imagine the Utah Jazz flip Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert for 10 first-round picks? Like, think about that. That is potentially on the table if the Knicks are willing to deal that many to – and Walker Kessler, who was a pick this year. Like, they could potentially get
the Knicks trade 6
first-round picks.
If they trade 6 first, they're going to break the NBA. It's just going to break it. Sure, like the trade system is going to be broken.
It's going to snap like Ryan's little arm.
I guarantee you, Sam Presti is sitting down in Oklahoma City and just applauding Danny.
I'm picturing Ryan's arm and it just snaps. Just that easily.
Wow. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna wrap this up here. I'm a little scared of my co-host right now.
This is Ryan's tricep.
Wow. Wow, this is scary. Look, I'm gonna wrap this up here. I want to shout out my boy Ochai Agbaji. He's the next Klay Thompson on both ends of the floor. Gonna be awesome. Gonna be sick.
How many points did he have today?
Yeah, he didn't play today because he's just that good. Look, anyone have a shout out before we wrap this up? Trevor, what do you want to say?
Shout out Joe Barksdale, one of the only openly autistic NFL players. Just did an interview that I read about. I think that's pretty cool. I have a brother who has mild autism, so I think that's a cool shout out. Cool. I don't think I have another one. I thought I had another one, but I had Joe Barksdale, so that's the one that I have for this podcast.
Wow. You got anything?
Shout out Flex from Jersey, man. He's been on this story the entire time. He called the DeAndre Ayton thing. We still have a chance for Kevin Durant. He is breaking news before these Woj, Shams, everyone else.
Bro.
Shout out to Flex for his hard work. He's getting some hate on social media.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you, do not trust these fake sources. Flex from Jersey has no sources. He spouts vague stuff and says all the possible scenarios, so he's right no matter what. Don't listen to him. Don't listen to him, please.
Flex be the type of guy to be like, you can either turn left or turn right. The team turns right and he goes, see, I told you they could turn right.
Exactly
But I
right.
have to shout him out because he was right about Ayton. He said it would be an S&T, or he specifically said that we would match the offer he gets.
He said sign and trade or they match. What a scenario. Wow.
I mean,
Well, he could have walked and he didn't. So he was right.
we could have,
There was a scenario that he would have been wrong, Ryan. You got to
Good Lord. Good
Look, it wasn't a crazy thing to call, but look, he's been accurate. He's been on top of it. He was right about Kevin Durant to a certain extent. I got to give the guy some credit. He called the Chris Paul move. He's not an idiot. I don't know about some of these other guys I see on Twitter, but Flex is halfway between legit and not legit.
We'll wrap this up. We can debate Flex from Jersey another day.
Shout out Salsa J. I think he's staying in the Valley, and that just makes me happy.
Look, I hope everyone enjoyed the podcast. I can't wait till Salsa J's on the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I hope you enjoy it. And we'll see you again next week. Talk more about this and some Donovan Mitchell. So we'll see you then.
Flex is him.